The University of Manitoba campuses are located on original lands on Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. MLA 50th anniversary. The Harlyn Thompson lecture this year is part of our landscape architecture anniversary celebration. Our landscape program turned 50th in 2022, and we are celebrating this anniversary with a series of events and lectures throughout the academic year 2022-23. The lecture tonight is part of our celebration program. Thanks to Harlyn Thompson and the Faculty of Architecture for the support, but also thanks to partners Brandy and Ainur. About the Harlyn Thompson lecture. Harlyn Thompson was the former Dean of the Faculty of Architecture. Harlyn continued to contribute to Winnipeg's architectural community through support of the annual Harlyn Thompson Lecture Series at the University of Manitoba and participation as a member of the Faculty of Architecture Partners Program. Harlyn established this lectureship with an endowed fund with the intention to bringing in participants from a range of design and research disciplines, recognizing projects whose significance extend beyond any one profession or field. Projects presented should emphasize a link between research and practice, demonstrating how an understanding of human interaction with place can inspire design. The commitment is to interdisciplinary focus with concern for human factors in the design of the built environment. Harlyn was always kept an eye on the selection of speakers, and he critically responded to Brandy. I like to believe that he would have more than agreed with our guest speaker tonight. Harlyn Thompson passed away on August 17th, 2021. Tonight's lecture is also in remembrance of Harlyn Thompson. About our speaker tonight. When asked for bio, our guest speaker responded with a few sentences. I read it as an expression of humility and modesty. So I read it. Dr. Jala Makhzoumi is a adjunct professor of landscape architecture, American University of Beirut, president of the Lebanese Landscape Association. In her research and practice, she pioneers a holistic developmental approach to landscape and seascape planning that mediates community needs with ecosystem health, biodiversity protection, and heritage conservation. In 2019, she received the European Council of Landscape Architecture Schools Lifetime Achievement Award, and in 2021, the IFLA Sir Geoffrey Jellicoe Award for her outstanding contribution to education and practice. There's so much more to say. I try to keep it short, but a few more words. First, the Sir Geoffrey Jellicoe Award in Landscape Architecture is the highest honor the International Federation of Landscape Architects, IFLA, can bestow and celebrates a living landscape architect whose, quote from their website, achievements and contributions have had a unique and lasting impact on the welfare of society and the environment and on the promotion of the profession of landscape architecture. Jala is an architect, academic and teacher who specialized in landscape design. She taught architecture and landscape at the University of Technology in Baghdad for 15 years. She received her master in environmental design from Yale University and a PhD in landscape architecture from Sheffield University. Jala is a writer. Amongst others, her publications include ecological landscape design and planning, the Mediterranean context, co-author Punggedi, and The Right to Landscape, Contesting Landscape and Human Rights, co-editors Egos and Punggedi. Jala also became an activist. And so, it's a quote, "It was landscape that pushed me to activism. Being able to provide alternative visions and protect sensitive sites and communities threatened by real estate development in a region where rapid urbanization is drastically shaping the local environment." Research, practice, and teaching are all equally important to Jala. Quote again, "How do you teach students to do ecological design? I didn't know. I had to practice to understand, because landscape architecture is about professional practice. I had to write, because by writing you reflect, you rethink, you read, you bring together, and you make sense of your ideas. And then when you teach, you explain and test both. I don't know how I could survive without all three of them. At times, it's overwhelming. I have reduced my teaching at the American University in Beirut, but continue to value my academic involvement. So many thanks for your commitment, continued involvement. It's our pleasure to benefit from your enduring commitment, Jala, and everybody in the audience can't wait to hear you. And I'm sure Harlyn is more than curious to listen to your voice. By the way, the lecture is on live stream, and I think we have guests from East Coast, West Coast, all across Canada, and from across the border. Please welcome Jala Makhzoumi. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for this amazing presentation. I am in awe and humbled, really, by your words. And it is truly an honor to be here in Winnipeg today. I thank the Cultural Committee in the Faculty of Agriculture for inviting me, and especially Professor Straub, but also all those who worked very hard in communicating and following through. And it is really a pleasure to be here among you. The title of my talk is From Defined Product to Fluid Process. I will start by talking about this transformation in landscape architecture and its expanding horizons. And then I will talk a little bit about my part of the world where I practice and have lived and teach for 40 years now. And the largest part is really my own trajectory, which has also transformed from product to process, which I would like to share with you through my own projects. So we start with the global horizon. For me, this is an image on the here is James Hayter, the past president of the International Federation of Landscape Architects, IFLA, and he spoke at the Congress in Oslo to conclude the Congress. And to me, the issues he raised, the global issues of landscape architecture, are truly a turning point. And it's the first time I have seen them projected this way and so starkly. Climate change, food security, agriculture, community participation, health, indigenous culture. It shows the scope, the expanding scope of architecture, landscape architecture. And this is echoed as well in the Routledge Research Companion to Landscape Architecture from the same year, and it talks about landscape architecture today becoming an increasingly professionalized as a quasi-global profession. It is really that. Of course, part of the change is global changes to climate. But another part of this change is also the shift in the way we think about environment. On the left-hand side is the model of environment which prevailed in the 70s and for quite a while. And it is mainly through global treaties and agreements and nations becoming signatories. And then it filters down to environment and its protection as natural resources, and it trickles down to the people. People are not very much aware of these treaties, and the designer doesn't have much of a role. Much has happened, as you can see in the middle, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, communities protesting all over the world. Why? Because it is a very different dynamic. Environment is no longer just resources. It is heritage, it is livelihood, and it is identity. And people care for this. They care to protect their environment. It means a lot to them. And so this new dynamic places the designer not on the periphery, but at the center. And the designer becomes an interpreter, a facilitator, a mediator with governments, local authorities, national authorities, and with funding agencies. And this is one of the cases that I will share with you. Another change came from scholarship across disciplines, not in landscape architecture. Since the 80s, three I have singled out that have really changed the way we think and research in landscape architecture. Ecological and environmental sciences, and specifically landscape ecology, Navi and Lieberman's monumental book. Geography, geographers have had the biggest contribution. Twan's book, Cosgrove was one of the first to bring in the politics of landscape, and Barbara Bender's book, similarly, and of course, Kenneth Alwig. These are all key contributions that came to shape the profession. They all poured into landscape architecture. And more recently, tying landscape with heritage and UNESCO's HUL, historic urban landscape approach, which is being increasingly applied. And so these have also changed. All of these changes warranted reconsidering of the definition of the profession by the ILO, International Labour Organization. And so in 2019, in that same Oslo conference, the representative from the 5 chapters of IFLA came together, and we worked for 1 year to revise the definition of landscape architecture. And I'd like to read to you the definition, the old definition on the left. And you can see this is what I meant by product. It says landscape architects plan and design landscapes and open spaces for projects such as parks, schools, institutions, roads, external areas for commercial, industrial, etc. So it is really open spaces. It is really a space, and the outcome is a product. The definition we came up with is not ideal, but it tries to reflect some of this transformation. Landscape architects plan, design, and manage natural and built environments, applying aesthetic scientific principles to address ecological sustainability, quality and health of landscape, collective memory, heritage, culture, and territorial justice. So this is already a very expansive scope. Then it continues to the second role, leading, coordinating other disciplines. And it concludes to create places that anticipate social and economic well-being. So it's a very, very different ballgame altogether. And this is perhaps best applied through the European Landscape Convention, which is the largest international recognition of landscape and its application to living heritage, to cultural diversity, to economic development, and to so much more. And even the definition is telling, and we're all familiar with it, and it's quoted so many times. So this is more or less what has been happening with the profession. We now turn to the part of the world where I practice and live, the Middle East, more or less. This map also from IFLA, you can see that the light gray is the place where the profession doesn't exist. There are no national chapters recognized by IFLA. And you can see there is a big vacuum in Africa and in the Middle East and in Pakistan. And the green is individual members. So more or less, landscape is a very new profession in this region, and it is only now being recognized with schools being established in many places. And it, unfortunately, even when there are schools in professional, it's very much the old definition. This is sad because this is the same region, which is the Fertile Crescent. It is the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. It is the place where Edenic landscapes were first described before the biblical and Quranic descriptions in the Epic of Gilgamesh, as you can see in the representation in the graphic picture. The region is also one that endures extreme degrees of aridity. And so water is very, very precious, very difficult to imagine that when I've been through the snowy landscapes around us. But water is a very precious resource. And to establish green areas such as these is extremely intensive, environmentally intensive, in terms of resources and human and natural resources. The region also endures what I call the colonial legacy. And Dietmar started with a recognition and acknowledgement to the First Nations, to the people of this land. And it is, in a way, not much different, but it is less recognized. So we have the region was occupied, and the line in the sand is very much the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and the way the terrain was divided and a new culture was imposed. And the outcome is geographical, ecological, and cultural discontinuities. We lost the continuity with our past, how cultures, our ancestors and grandparents dealt with the land, with the environment, and we sort of lost that connection and that history, and started looking to the West to find solutions and answers, which is problematic. It is also because of this a place of extreme political instability, which doesn't help either. Again, it is problematic. Okay, how does this reflect on landscape? Landscape was introduced when Middle Eastern towns were westernized. And so landscape came to be associated with urban beautification, with tree-lined boulevards and municipal gardens. So this is why I try to say that this is landscape. This beautiful, the amazing gaff trees, which are in excess of sometimes 15 meters wide, native trees that survive in the most difficult conditions, is not landscape, because this is only what is recognized as landscape. So this is, again, problematic. So this is more or less the context for the practice that I will share with you. I will start by looking at the expanding scope as I try to represent it. The first question I ask is, what is ecological landscape design? I was fascinated with, I was an architect, in Iraq, I studied architecture, and then I taught architects, but I was always impassioned with landscape and so wanted to study landscape, but I didn't have the opportunity. So I came through the back door and through alleyways to try to find what landscape is. And so my first impression is really landscape as space and place. This is really the landscape I understood. But how is landscape an ecosystem? So again, in Iraq, I was bothered by what I saw, the emphasis on, big sums of money on residential units, which looked very good and very green on the brochure, but looked miserable, not only because this is under construction, even after it's completed and inhabited, it just looks very stark. It's just very wrong because buildings are built and landscape is addressed later on. We plant a few trees here and there, and then that's the landscape. It's a very wrong way of approaching landscape. So this bothered me. And the first line of defense I had was really to look, there was no vocabulary for landscape that was appropriate. So I tried to look at trees and plants and how they can be used to improve the site microclimate, to improve energy gain in buildings. And this was really the way. It was about really, it's very much the topic now, but it wasn't then. But this is really how I came into it. And I've used the research even now in a lot of my designs. But eventually I came to realize that it is much more than climate. It is not just climate. This is one of the key points, the turning points, because this is a small settlement, Ana, Upper Euphrates Valley, which is in gray. You can see in gray. And it is an incredible settlement that is 4,000 years old. It was an Assyrian settlement. The river Euphrates cuts the desert, and there is like a valley, narrow valley, a little bit like the Nile in Egypt. And the settlement is sheltered by the crevices, and it's an incredibly efficient utilization of the land. The palm trees create what we now call permaculture, but almost like shelter from the cold and the sun for the planting underneath the citrus fruit. The percent of open spaces, the building, the green areas, paths, roads is well studied. Water is taken from the river through water wheels, sent to the highest point, and then it flows back through gravity. This is ecological design. This is sustainable design. And this was an incredible experience for me. The town was abandoned and submerged because they were building a dam. And the new town that was built, as you can see here, look at the difference between the two. The site they chose was the wrong site. The soil, there's no topsoil, nothing grows there. And then the large spaces. So one of the first challenges is, what can I plant there? What will grow? But why create the spaces to begin with? Look at the comparison of streets here and the fabric. So much energy was spent on what kind of arch, what colors, but nothing on the context and the environment. And this here, I knew what was ecological, what was not. The challenge was, how can I teach it? How can I teach students in a studio what is ecological so that they think and are guided? I didn't know. I had to move to another biome. I moved to North Cyprus, to the island of Cyprus, Mediterranean. And over there, I did my research, and I was involved in a project, and it was a totally different landscape, not arid at all. I had to learn what the ecology was. But what I did see is that, again, vernacular cultures and local people knew how to deal with that environment, with all of those components, and they did it so beautifully. Forests at the peaks, and then dense scrublands, and olive and carob groves in the. So you see, they're the two biomes. I was in a desert biome here, more or less, and then this is the Mediterranean that I moved to. It is this comparison that helps me slowly understand. I realized also that as the land and people shape the land and the landscape evolves, the same pattern of forests in the upper mountains and then dense maquis, the water courses and the ravines was replicated on a local scale. And so I used it in the project I was working with, which was a tourism project. And I looked at the landscape over there. And what I tried to do was look at how the interaction happened and how it evolved, identify components and try to almost recycle them within the design. So one of them is what I call the plateau, which is really the large part, the flat part, which was a favorite part to build on. But I argued that no, we will not build here. Build on the peripheries and keep this as almost a native park of olive trees and sheep and goats graze, and it's a very precious ecosystem and a cultural ecosystem and the landscape, and also protecting the water course, the ravine, and stopping development there. And when I was asked, no, sorry. And when we should have had one more, no. So when I was asked to convince the client, the argument was there's no water in Cyprus and this is a sustainable landscape. And then we didn't, sustainable was new, but it's economically feasible. You will not need to irrigate it. It has biodiversity. It is culturally appropriate. And so the client was, and the owner also was convinced. And as you can see, all the bungalows were gathered around, and this remained a large space. And then the ravine was also protected, and there's a turtle nesting site at the end. And the largest portion was along the, here, you can see it better, along this peninsula. So this was the most built. So this experience of design and research and looking at the vernacular inspired it was my PhD thesis, and we published it with my good friend Gloria Pungetti, looking at ecological design. Basically, it's a marriage between ecology and design, looking at very different, first of all, ecological understanding, looking at different objectives where landscape integrity, sustainability, and enhancing genus loci is important. Design approach is holistic, probabilistic, hierarchical, and evolutionary. I'll talk more. And then the methodological framework depends on ELA's, Ecological Landscape Association, which is a way to understand how the landscape evolved, how people interacted with it, but then also a way to recycle what has come out, just like that tourist project, into the new design so that it retains character and it continues to be sustainable. So in the end, what happens is that you have this expansive understanding of landscape, where landscape is really people, sorry, the E's dropped, people interacting with environment, creating places. The dynamic interaction is the landscape. Landscape is not the environment. It's total, it's changing, it's moving, it's in total flux, but also it changes when you go up and down the spatial hierarchy from the global, from what Nave calls the total human ecosystem, the global, to the regional and the local. And it also has a temporal axis where it looks to the past as heritage and to the future as sustainable development. So the next question is, how can landscape architects or architecture address social injustice and human rights? This is the second step. I had a case study where, after the war bombardments in South Lebanon, where I applied the landscape approach to post-war recovery, and everybody was laughing. I mean, post-war recovery, you make gardens for them. I mean, these people have lost their homes, and it was an incredible eye-opener. I learned from that experience. This is another case that I will share, where landscape is ecosystem, it is rights, it is also heritage. This is a project for what they call inner green belt, but it is really the green belt. Erbil is in northern Iraq. It is one of the oldest continually inhabited settlements, together with Aleppo. They're both citadel towns. And the project was to create a green belt, first of all, to try to contain urban sprawl, but also as an amenity belt, so the urban population can go and enjoy it. And the lead consultant is Khatib and Alami. They're a very big firm. And the client is the Ministry of Municipality and Ministry of Agriculture in the Kurdish region. When we arrived, somebody told me, look, you don't need to bother about the green belt. We have the design. It's all finished. I was wondering, how do they have the design? He said, look, it's very easy. There are 23 villages, first of all, the landscape, rolling landscape, rain-fed agriculture, mainly grain, pastoral sites, and an amazing network of seasonal water courses. All of this, and the client was going to remove everything, evacuate the villages, and plant forest trees, mainly cypresses and Pinus brutea, wild pine trees. And it's incredible because what about the people in that belt, you know? So we turned, this is the client's vision. We turned it upside down. Sorry, this is very sensitive. The client's vision. And what we did is we said, no. People are at the heart of this green belt, the people in these villages. And our mission is really to improve their lot. It is very unjust for you to do this to them. So we will look at sustainable agriculture, diversify the agriculture. We will look at heritage tourism. We will look at amenity landscapes, as you asked, biodiversity conservation, and the management, sustainable management of water courses. So you see, it's a very, very different vision. And the way we did it is look at different layers. We looked at the ring road, which is mainly a very limited area of amenity services that urban population can go to, agricultural lands, revamping agriculture so that it is much more diversified, relying on intercropping with fruit trees and much more sustainable economically. And we looked at also areas where the soil, there was no topsoil for agriculture. We reserved as biodiversity areas and plots, but also grazing in some parts. And then the northern and southern water courses. So it's a very different view to the clients. And it is giving back the dignity and the rights to those people that are in these villages. The way we convince the client, again, because you always have to convince the client so that they accept the alternative vision that you're giving, is that don't you want to celebrate? This is a region that was, the Kurdish region was just was established, and the Kurdish identity, Kurdish heritage. Okay, you have Kurdish identity and heritage in the green belt, and you're destroying it. So keep it and celebrate it. Don't destroy it. And they were very happy, so they accepted. And anyway, it was economically feasible, it was socially just, and it was also celebrating the heritage. So you can see different aspects of the heritage in rural Kurdistan. So this was, I will flip very quickly through the slide, not that quickly. So these are all the zones for agriculture, which is innovative and branded so that it becomes special produce in the green belt, support and enable local communities. So this was one aspect. With shelter belts is also a very important thing, just like you have here in Winnipeg outside. It's again, but it is not to shelter, not from the snow and the cold, but from the sandstorms. So it's different, but it's very similar. The second one is the what we called ecological, corridors, northern greenways, recognizing it with special forestry planting so that it is connectors that connect this landscape so that there isn't only the urban sprawl and the green belt, but it goes across and connects the villages, and it is a place for tourism as well. And this is the more conventional amenity landscape that was asked for. And as you can see, it is, okay, it's landscape, it's beautiful, it's acceptable, but at least we limited this to a specific part of the project. I put in this table, I've always put the references, so if you'd like to say, but this is something I do. You look at the existing landscape, and you look at socioeconomic value, heritage value, and ecological environmental value. This is what landscape architecture does with this holistic and dynamic approach. It combines all of those values. It doesn't just look at environment. It doesn't just look at cultural heritage. It doesn't just look at economic benefits. It looks at all of them and packages them as such. So you can see each one of the components in the green belt, the villages, natural pastoral lands, reforested lands, the agriculture, each one had values, those three values. And this is, again, this multifaceted, multiple is a very important part of what we do. And you can see a lot of these respond to what this is in 2009, so it is. The second project, and this is the last project that I will talk about, is also a very interesting one. It is Med Cities, and it's an European community-funded project for Sidon. Sidon is a Phoenician harbor town south of Beirut, the capital in Lebanon. And you can see the Mediterranean, and it's a very beautiful city. It's a collaborative consultancy. The lead consultant is Med Cities, and funding, as I said, and Saida municipality is the key. And again, it is in the Mediterranean. So Saida, this is Saida. This is Lebanon, and you can see the Mount Lebanon with its, it has 3,000 meters above the sea. It's the highest mountains in that part of the Middle East. And then look at the many ravines and water courses that come down from the mountains, which are often forgotten. There is a citadel from Phoenician times and Crusaders' time, a sea citadel, and it is also a very complex society, because you have a mix always in the Middle East. This is sometimes a problem instead of being celebrated. You have in yellow Sunni Muslims, and you have in orange Christians. You have in red Shiite Muslims. So you can see the hatched where the dynamics are changing. So it's also very important to be inclusive of these. And that is really, I will talk in a minute about that. But also in gray, it is the largest Palestinian refugee camp. So again, how to engage all of these and not to be, not to exclude. I will read the cross-border cooperation in the Mediterranean. It's a very, very fantastic, really, approach, because it regards strategic planning as a continuous management method rather than a one-off planning. So it's not a master plan like in the previous project, but rather a continuous process of social and economic agents, neighbors, union, entrepreneurs, ordinary people. So all of these become active players in the urban transformation, directly, jointly responsible for financing, executing projects which are strategic to the whole city. It's a vision. This is this strategic framework so that when projects come, they know what to do. And so the other aspect is that it is built on participatory design, truly participatory. So we have each one of those tracks has a group of people selected that represent the community. They could be entrepreneurs, they could be local community, schools, and so on. We meet regularly, and there is a town meeting as well. The third aspect is really the interdisciplinary approach. So you see, you have cultural heritage, Huwaida is leading, local economy and governance, you have urban infrastructure, and you have myself and Selva, my student, ecology and environment. And I put landscape in red because I told this morning when I was talking to Professor Straub, that they said, when I said, landscape, they said, no, please. This is a serious project. This is not about gardens, because the conception is gardens. Why should we have landscape here? And of course, I said, just wait and you will see. So why landscape? Because landscape packages environment and ecosystem and ecology. If there was no landscape here, and I could have done a report on ecology and environment, but it would have been stacked in a library somewhere, nobody making use of it. But when you package it as landscape, first of all, it has a face and it is meaningful to people. Secondly, as landscape architects, we are proactive. We will find ways to use this river, as it happens, or whatever, to gain a better position, to improve the position of the people. So this is so the components. I'll go quickly because I'm sure that I've yeah. So one of the components was the abandoned railway, agriculture that was shrinking. So these were two components, but the key component that we focused on were those seasonal rivers that came down. Some of them were completely covered by, they covered them with the road. This is the old memory of them. Some of them were turned into culverts, and you can see it's interrupted. And of course, they forget that nature doesn't forget. So every time there is a flood and everything is flooded, and they look in the summer and it's dry. So why is everybody worrying? But nature doesn't forget and it floods. So one of the big problems was, I'll explain this because I think it's important. The red points are gathering points, and the sewage, the effluent, is gathered and taken to the plant to be processed. First of all, the sewage network is located in the rivers. So they break. Stormwater is mixed with the sewage, and the volume becomes too much to transport to sewage treatment. So everything is discharged into the sea. Marine resources are polluted, and the rivers themselves become a problem. And so what we tried to do with the hydrological engineer, oh gosh. Sorry. So we tried to take a small part of the site and try to see if stormwater discharge, we can harvest rain and store it for irrigation. And so that the only water in the river will be just what excess is there, and it becomes a much cleaner environment. So with the engineer, we looked at how much we can gather from where, and to make our argument, and it was quite convincing to take care of it. This is more or less the concept that we proposed: a green-blue network with the railway, abandoned railway. The water courses I've just drawn two, but there are many more. And this is the final strategic framework. And you can see how the seasonal water courses and the coast have played a key aspect in it. And again, the same looking at water courses, the water courses that have environmentally healthy integrity of the eco corridor, socioeconomic benefits for tourism, irrigation, landscape heritage. They have a memory and amenity quality greenways. It's a way. And how it addressed the communities is because the camp I told you about is here. So really, people can use this as a way to, as an amenity. What I love about this project is we did the idea and it finished, and it is there. Now they're pursuing actually. But as we were working, two NGOs, local activists and societies came on board. One of them is Shajaru Bashar. It's trees and people. And they took Sikka, which is the railway. They took up the railway and they bring in youth from across all the range, all the different political and religious division. And they took care of that corridor, they cleaned it and used it as a promenade in a very simple, rustic way. But it was incredible because, first of all, the youth from schools realized that this is their right and they are working for their own community. So it was a very successful initiative. The second is Lil Medina initiative. And these are more architects and planners. And they started looking at the rivers that I showed and looking at the memory. And you can see the translation of the name. It's El Kamli River, Greater Saida, stories of its disappearance and revival. They traced all the springs that people had forgotten about. And they tried to work also, very importantly, rivers don't know political and administrative boundaries. They worked with the different political factions on both sides of river so that they can really make this project happen. So this is, again, something, with this I conclude. I showed this slide because I spoke about the professional vacuum. For many years, when I practiced in this political vacuum, I lamented and I was frustrated that there was no discourse on landscape architecture. And I was struggling to explain what it is, but then the vacuum was a blessing because in some ways it liberated me from the conventional approach that prevailed elsewhere. And I could look at the incredible potential of landscape architecture, as I said, to look at human rights, social injustice, as an activist, and to try to show really the horizons of this profession. I hope that all of you will contribute. I'm sure there are many, many more horizons that you can contribute to, having seen the incredible landscape all around Winnipeg, not the town itself, but the rural landscape. And it's incredible. There's so much to do there. So I wish you all that you can find new horizons, that you can excel and show that the professional scope continues to expand.
Well, thank you so much, Jala. Thank you to Harlyn as well.
Yes.
To make this happen. I think we have some minutes. And do you have some energy?
Yes, yes, of course, of course. I'm sorry, I took longer than I intended.
Great, Jala. No worries. So, are there questions from the floor of the audience? Very silent. So, because it's live stream, so we invite our attendees of the live stream to, can they ask questions or do they have to type it in? And I know we'll read it. Do we have already some questions or comments? Not yet. Maybe start with a very short question.
Yes.
Who was the client for this project in Robin? Who is the client?
The client,
About the client.
yeah, the client is the Ministry of Works, and they collaborate with the Ministry of Tourism and the Ministry of Agriculture because it's agricultural lands. So they were very eager to expropriate the lands and take the people out so that they can have a monocultural planting of just trees. And this is really, and because this is, again, it's sad. This is something specific to our part of the world, to the global south. The conceptions are always, whether it's in cities, the conception is always 30 years old. Not always, I mean, a lot of the time is outdated, like bringing in more highways and motorway exchanges and so on. And this is changing all over the world. But we're still behind, and these are being implemented, and so this engineering sort of approach, technology sort of building dams on small rivers, which is very damaging. I mean, these seasonal water courses have succeeded and are ecologically perfect and sustainable with terraces in the upper reaches, and they've managed. So bringing these technological solutions in. So the thing is that, again, the ministry is well-meaning. It's not that they are, they don't mean harm, but that is, their knowledge is that these outdated shelter belts that used to be implemented by the British in army camps and in sometimes around towns, and they could not realize that things are changing, there's biodiversity and agriculture is changing, and that there is an opportunity to bring all of these together. So in a way, the project was great because we could give it to them. And now they're trying to implement it. There were, again, political interruption. Now it has been signed, and hopefully some of these ideas will be implemented.
Thank you. Now there was time to think about comments or questions. Yeah, for sure. I do. Hey, go ahead, please.
Thank you for your work today. So many students here, including myself, or I'm technically an alumna. We come from, we're in other parts of the world, and some of the parts that you mentioned don't have the profession of landscape architecture as an established profession, or at least not in a larger scheme of things. How would you advise emerging landscape architects to start to do work there and not feel intimidated by the lack of support from other landscape architects that might or might not live there?
Thank you. Thank you very much for this question. Yeah, it's a very good question because there are two answers. First of all, I have found that going to the International Federation of Landscape Architects helps, because if you establish an association, it is an umbrella, a platform. It's not a professional one, but it's not like professional monitoring of practice. No, but it is an umbrella for professionals, for young graduates to come together and discuss what it is, to promote their profession. And we did this in Lebanon, the Lebanese Landscape Association, and it was the first in the Middle East to be established, and the Jordanians followed. But one thing we have to concede to, if you notice, in Iran, for example, it's called ISLA, Iranian Society for Landscape Professionals, not architects. And in Lebanon, we said Lebanese Landscape Association. We didn't put architects. And this is for a reason, because many times we have to, again, be inclusive. Agriculturists and horticulturists, ecologists are contributing to the landscape. Don't have to be exclusive to architecture. So at least I think they should be recognized, the work that they are doing, and included in the debate to generate a discourse on landscape architecture. So when you start establishing the National Association, if you're going to look for landscape architects to make a group, you will not find them. In a lot of these countries, you won't find enough. In the Emirates, in Dubai and Emirates, all of the landscape that they're doing, there isn't a single landscape architect. I am looking for them. I can't find any. So I'm going to horticulturists that are doing all of the landscapes. They've experimented for 15 years. They know how to manage them better. And so I will look to engineers that are establishing infrastructure that overlaps with landscape. People who teach landscape sometimes for more than 10 years or that have implemented. So this is how the society, this develops a critical mass. And these people can then discuss, debate, and promote the profession. And hopefully more professionals will come and the dynamics will be there. So, and I urge all of you, if you come from countries, I mean, in Canada, in America, in Europe, and even in parts of Asia, they have established landscape. You saw the map is very telling, but in the parts where there isn't, the profession is emerging, it's not recognized, I would really advise that to go through IFLA. And then IFLA networks, it pairs. For example, the next Congress is in Nairobi in Kenya, and they've paired it with, I think, with Sweden. So this is another thing that's good. So pairing an association in the global south with one in the global north. So we learn from their experience, but they also learn from the opportunities there are. And a lot of people from the global north will come, landscape architects, and work, because there are challenging environments and problematics that really expand the professional scope. So that would be my answer.
We've got 2 more questions in the chat.
Okay.
So the first one's from Jala. Thank you, Dr. Makhzoumi. I really enjoyed the presentation. Question, with all the understanding that is taking place in different parts of the world towards landscape architecture, do you see landscape architecture moving side by side with urban planning and our modern thinking of cities?
Yeah, this is a good question as well. Thank you, Hala. Yes, I frankly don't, I don't see, again, just like what I was answering, I don't see this exclusivity of landscape architects. I believe in the collaboration between architects, urban designers, and landscape. Urban design and landscape overlap in the city. They're just, you cannot separate them. And architects have the skill to the design language and the skills to address it. They need to be educated in landscape, and then they can, I think, contribute beautifully. So I really believe in the collaboration of those disciplines, specifically the 3 that were listed: architecture, urban design, and landscape architecture. I really think that the programs in schools should have much more interaction. For example, at the American University of Beirut, there was a very successful Masters of Landscape Design. Masters of Urban Design, MUD. And I've taught there with students. They became so interested in landscape because they saw this is a very different way, the ecology and the system thinking that it brings. So now the program is LUD. They introduced the L. It's Program Masters of Landscape and Urban Design. That's how it should be. I really believe that we should work much harder to bring. We learn from each other and to bolster the profession.
So the next question is from Nazi. She says, thank you for your interesting presentation. I really enjoyed it. I was just wondering about the demographic shift in the Kurdish region of Iraq during the significant number of Syrian refugees that have migrated there. As you mentioned in your article, redefining the landscapes, many have decided to settle down and establish families and homes. I'm curious to know if there have been any changes in the landscape design of the area in response to these developments. The influence of the local culture and different ethnicities of refugees.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Yes. And in fact, after this project, the Green Belt, after we did the Green Belt, there was a big interruption by the Islamic State because it invaded north of Iraq and the sites, it camped on the Green Belt that you saw. After that, after they were warded off, a lot of refugees came and settled. And we applied for funding for a project that looks at post-war recovery in rural Erbil through a landscape approach, through this landscape approach. And it was a very nice project. It was a citizen scientists project that we used. They went to the villages, they looked at their heritage with them, and we identified specific interventions in each village because yes, this problem is there because a lot of the refugees that came are Arab, ethnic Arab, and the native population is Kurdish. So in many villages, yes, the question, you are right. Yes, the culture changes, but doesn't culture change everywhere? We are all influenced by global culture, so nothing stays, stationary. There is influences, but trying to reconcile these through such workshops and such projects that bring the two together to discuss the new habitat and how they can collaborate helps. So yes, it will change, but then maybe we have to also embrace some of the changes.
That's it for questions in the chat.
Okay, fine.
Does anyone on the floor have any questions?
Yes.
My question was earlier, you had mentioned at the end of your presentation. My question was at the end of your presentation, you had mentioned that you're grateful for your roundabout way of getting to your career in landscape. And you had mentioned that in some ways you were glad that you didn't do like going through an established institution the way most of us I was just meaning to ask, like, what differences did you see between how you would think and how you would approach a project versus those who came from an established institution?
Yeah, you taught me there. Yeah, it's good. The thing is that it's not that I'm grateful there was no discourse, not that there was, I wish I could have studied landscape. I didn't have that opportunity open to me. So I came about it from architecture, through this energy, through ecology, and found my way. But I think it is much better to be taught. I wish I had the opportunity to go to a program. I'll tell you why. Because because I tripped and fell, and it's not always successful. I was always fighting. I didn't have the support of colleagues that were with me in class, like I did in architecture, which was amazing. But in landscape, I didn't have all of that. So it was, I'm talking about it now very quickly and presenting the project, but it was also a struggle. At times, people would say, oh, we really don't know what she does. She does something with the environment, It's so frustrating. They can't even, because landscape we don't have a translation in Arabic. Imagine you have a profession with no title. We're debating the title. So it is very difficult. But no, by far, when you study. So it is difficult, but also when landscape programs, education programs, balance the knowledge that you gain. They give you the design skills, but they also give you the knowledge in ecology. They could tell you about soils, about hydrology, about all of those things, about plants. I hope they do. So when you get all of this information, then there's no way you can. So you need that. You really need all of this, but you need to mix it all inside you. You can't just, you need to go through this process of getting all of those disciplines help you. We were just talking about how important it is in a design studio to have an interdisciplinary team come and teach you, because each one has a perspective and you see all the perspectives and then you make your own mind. And so for sure, for sure, I wish I can go back and study now, but of course I know I can't. So no, you're in the right program. Trust me.
So which school would you choose?
Which school would I choose? Anthropology. I would love to know more about people and how to work with cultures and how to, because I now have the skills. I have the skills, the design skills, and I have gained some knowledge in landscape. I'd love to know. This is an area that, and the book, one of the books Barbara Bender's book, Landscape Politics, it's incredible. She talks for the first time, she questions this anthropocentric Western way of looking at landscape as owned land, cadastrally owned, and as I am the center and I see the landscape. Cultures in different places have very different ways of appreciating environment and the landscape, even if the word doesn't exist. So I would love to go to anthropology. Maybe I'll do another PhD in anthropology. Anyway, yeah.
We have a follow-up question from the last question in here, and it's the last question. So this is Nancy again. She says, "Thank you so much for your answer. I also have another question regarding the similarities that may exist in the Kurdish indigenous landscape between the Kurds of Iraq and Iran. In your opinion, has the separation between these two countries had any impact on the cultural influences on their landscapes?"
If I understand it correctly, the landscape has an influence on them. Yes, it does. But also, yeah, the landscape in northern Iran is, the Kurdish region is really divided into three parts more: Turkey, Iraq, Iran. And the terrain shapes the culture also. And there are commonalities and there are divergences. But the vegetation and the actual landscape but the terrain is different. Also, the cultural, political trajectory in the three is very different. I think this is really what the key influence that changes how they look at the landscape. But the landscape also has its influence. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you.
I think.
Oh, there's one question from local students. Nothing you want to have in mind? Huh?
Really?
Yeah, I can.
I don't like I want to see, but I use it.
Yes, so we're talking combined work.
Yes.
So like when we're working with communities which don't care or understand the importance of ecology or wildlife,
Yes.
how can we open the conversation where, like, how do we start that conversation where we try to explain why it is important?
Give it a face, give it a landscape. Really, as I mentioned about the rivers, landscape, I define it as the visible, tangible expression of an ecosystem. Because ecosystem and environment is abstract. I mean, so they don't relate to it. But if you tell them, look at this little woodland, or look at this row of trees that were planted, and maybe do you know who did it? Wow, why? Who comes and sits under it? Just look at the landscape with all the stories it will engage them. But if you look at it from an ecology point of view, it's again, it's similar in a way to, you're talking about the ecology, but even with development, when you landscape is about context. So landscape will contextualize solutions so that whether they're environmental or economical or so, it roots them in place. So this is, again, this is another advantage of landscape. So give it a face, give it a story, and then you will, but you have to do your research as well. So that would be my answer. Yeah, that's it.
I think
Yeah, they've been good enough. Yeah.
it was a long day for you after a long flight.
Yeah.
It must be tired.
No, I'm all pent up with the topic and the questions, so I'm not tired. But they're tired. They've been listening to me for so long.
So I think it was a long day for
Yes.
everybody in the audience and for the students. This be a question, or was this? No, but they have lots of work to do, so I would say thank you so much to all of you, attending this evening.
Yes.
Because it's a very special lecture provided by Jala and funded by Harlyn.
Yes.
Thank you for your teamwork today. Fantastic. I wish all of you a good night. And we have a few more events in the lecture coming up on March 30th. It's always great to see students from our program, students we know, ED and landscape architect, and I think it's so great to see students from architecture. Because everybody agrees when we talk about multidisciplinary, but when our environment, it seems to be very disciplinary, except having some students. So thank you very much for coming and for attending. Great. So have a good night.